So David he founded his own publishing company, Adventures Unlimited Press, in 1984, as well as the World Explorer Club. But David is one of these people who travels around, keeps up to date. He's always going to the sites looking for things which are uniform across continents and cultures, which you'll be seeing on his show. It's been a while since David's been at a Nexus Conference, at least 10 years or so. During that time, we've grown in numbers, we've grown in size. So give him an even bigger welcome than he did last time. David Hatcher Childress.
Thanks, Duncan. Well, thanks, Duncan. That's great. It's good to be here again. And although I've never been to this resort, it's super. And I want to tell you a little bit about myself before I launch into the presentation. I was born in France, but my parents are Americans. And I grew up in Colorado. My father was a lawyer and loved to camp, and I was a skier and mountain climber. My parents liked to travel. So I was lucky as a kid, and we went to Stonehenge and the pyramids in Mexico and Greece and Turkey and Hawaii and stuff like that. And I've always been interested in archaeology, Atlantis, UFOs, cryptozoology, psychic phenomenon, all that kind of stuff. And I went to the University of Montana for a while, and then eventually I went to Taiwan as an English teacher. And ultimately I went to Thailand and Burma and Calcutta and Kathmandu. I wanted to go to Tibet and climb in the Himalayas. Edmund Hillary, one of my heroes. After that, I traveled through the Middle East, through Afghanistan and Iran, Turkey, Syria, went to Egypt, traveled through Africa for a couple of years, returned to India and Asia and China, back to the United States, then started going to Central America and South America, and then also to Australia and Pacific Islands. And I'm the author of a number of books, and one of my main interests really is megalithic technology, megalith building, and ancient technology. And that's pretty much what we're going to see today. We'll start out with some megaliths around the world, and then we're going to look at some unusual skulls and possible alien craniums and things like that, and then finally some ancient technology. So mainstream archaeologists are saying that the oldest ruins in the world, up until recently, were the ones in Malta. And these ruins here at Malta, and these ones here, Giganteja, which is on the island of Gozo in Malta. And archaeologists were saying that these were about 9,000 years old to about 7,000 BC. And in fact, on Malta is this cave called the Gardalam Cave, and it's evidence of a big cataclysm that hit Malta, a huge wave that wiped Malta out, and Malta at that time must have been at least a series of islands and maybe a land bridge to Sicily, and a bunch of pygmy elephants and hippopotami and other deer were washed into this cave, and so they know that some kind of cataclysm hit Malta. But now, mainstream archaeologists are saying that the oldest ruins in the world are at Göbekli Tepe, this place which is in southern Turkey. And at Göbekli Tepe, it is a megalithic site. Archaeologists are saying that this is 11 to 12,000 years old, going back to nearly 10,000 BC. It has many T-shaped megaliths, and on many of them are animals like foxes and serpents, and vultures are carved into it. This site was also purposely buried after it was, at some point after it was built. It's being excavated right now by German archaeologists. And this is all totally mainstream archaeology. Here's where it is, Göbekli Tepe. It's right near the Syrian border, actually, and conflict zone. The largest megaliths in the world that we know about are actually at Baalbek in Lebanon. And this is Baalbek. It's also near the Syrian border, and it's kind of a dangerous place to go. And what's there are these, a Roman temple is on top, but below it is a giant platform of blocks of limestone. Here are the blocks again. Right here, these giant blocks. They weigh about 1,000 tons, which is extremely heavy for a stone. Some of the actually bigger stones that weigh like 1,200 tons are actually in the quarry nearby. And so archaeologists are looking at this, and the builders here they're building with blocks of stone that are just so incredibly big, so large that it boggles our mind. Why would people even try to build with giant blocks of stone like this? Mainstream archaeologists have to explain this, and here's how they do it. They're saying that the builders, and they're saying Romans in this case, would build a cage around these giant blocks, and they would put in the blocks small hourglass type cuttings, and then they would have little hourglass inserts that would fit into that, and then pulleys on the cage, and then they would, once it was all set up, they would pull on these ropes and they would lift this 1,000-ton block up and move it a few inches and then start again. So this is their explanation for how people are doing this. But you have to think, why would you even want to build out of such giant blocks of stone and do something which seems to be so incredibly difficult? And of course, anti-gravity or levitation, and it's my postulation that, yeah, they're doing this, it's easy for them, not so hard. Now this is actually a rare photo of Jerusalem and the Temple Mount there, where the Dome of the Rock and King Solomon's temple was. And inside of a temple, inside of a cave, and it's only recently you could see this, there is this giant block of stone, like at Baalbek. And it's also weighing like 1,000 tons or something. And in fact, there's other blocks down here. Let's see, all right, here we go. And you can see other blocks of stone here. They're perfectly fitted. They're also probably weighing 10, 20 tons. And then this gigantically huge block that's above it. So what's at Baalbek is also, in a sense, at the temple in Jerusalem. All right, let's now go to Abydos in Egypt. This is southern Egypt. Abydos has the Sirion, that's what this building is. It's near to Luxor in Egypt. And in fact, the Egyptian government spent decades pumping water out of this because it was mainly in a swamp underwater. And the pharaonic temple of Abydos is right next to it. There's no hieroglyphs or any kind of indication that the Egyptians themselves built this. In fact, they built another temple right next to it. But let's look at some of the blocks. You see these curious knobs here. You see this little notching of the stones that notch and fit them together, that it's not perfectly straight lines of stone. So now let's go to Cuzco in the Andes of Peru. And we start to see this granite construction that's perfectly fitted together blocks. It's polygonal. You can't get a razor blade or a piece of paper in between these finely cut blocks. This is the famous stone of 12 angles, also in an alleyway right near the central square in Cuzco. And this stone appears on the label of the local beer that they make. They've recently found another stone which has even more angles than this, has like 13 angles. So when you go to Cuzco, this is actually right down the street, you see this polygonal shaped jigsaw fitting of the blocks, and even other fine megalithic construction that seems a little bit different at a later period up above it. This kind of blocks, they're perfectly fitted together and they lock together. In even the big earthquakes that hit South America all the time, these walls stay together. This is a site actually in northern Greece, and it's called the Necromonticon. And it was underground. It was only excavated in 1960. And it's in a remote part of Greece up near the Albanian border. And in fact, it has the same jigsaw pattern of megalithic construction, just like we see in Cuzco. Let's go back to Cuzco, and just above the city of Cuzco is a giant fortress on a hill, and it's called Sacsahuaman. The Spanish and the Incas fought a battle here at one point. This is an aerial photo of Sacsahuaman. You can see this zigzag pattern of these giant walls. And there's a huge field. And over here, it's like a big football field or something. And it would be a place for, say, a giant airship or something like that to land. Huge polygonal-shaped walls here too, and blocks that are fitted together. This is actually a gal from Sydney who went on one of our tours, Karen Kelly. And you can see here again, this polygonal-shaped blocks fitted together. It's a kind of indestructible kind of megalithic construction. Sacsahuaman is an astonishing place. The Spanish, when they got there, they couldn't believe it. They thought that the devil himself had built these buildings. And around Sacsahuaman, too, is this unusual areas where you have blocks of stone that are upside down. People have cut like stairways and things like that in it, and it doesn't make any sense. There just seems to be no reason for someone to come here and cut and carve this. It's like somebody who has power tools is just playing with them and practicing with their stone cutting devices and things like that. There's other areas there around Sacsahuaman where there's tunnels cut into solid rock. And the popular legend around Cuzco is that the big treasure of the Incas and the gold from the Sun Temple there is hidden in these underground tunnels that go throughout Cuzco and the Sacsahuaman area. Mainstream archaeologists are saying that the Incas didn't know the wheel, they didn't know about writing, that they were actually a very primitive culture. And yet, they wanted to build with giant megalithic blocks weighing 20, 100, 200 tons, and perfectly fitting them together. So, in theory, yeah, they're just using muscle power, they're dragging them up ramps, then they're placing them in these walls, and they have to perfectly fit together, too. They can't just stack up these rocks and things. They have to be perfectly fitted. This is Machu Picchu. Machu Picchu is today the #1 tourist site in all of South America. And Machu Picchu is a megalithic city. It's a secret city built on top of a mountain. And we don't even know its name. It's not, the name of the city is not Machu Picchu, really. It's something else. The Spanish never found this city, and it wasn't really discovered until about 1910. At Machu Picchu are megalithic walls out of granite. This one is pulling apart from settling. Notice again these knobs and things like that. Up here, also the notching of the stones, big lichen patches. This is another wall at Machu Picchu, perfectly fitted blocks, huge lichen patches, and that's usually indicative of a great age. Although the Incas were a culture that was very near to the Spanish, and mainstream archaeologists are saying this city was built only like 100 years or so before the Spanish got there. And yet it would really seem to be many thousands of years old. This is one of my favorite sites in Peru, and it is a place called Ollantaytambo. And what tourists are seeing when they go to Ollantaytambo is they go up here to these cliffs, and it's a knife ridge that comes out, and it's cliffs on both sides. And up here are these megaliths. To go up there, you walk up these terraces and up these stairs, and then you walk up here and up these stairs, and eventually you get up to this part up here, and then you start to walk over to the really megalithic part of the city. And as you go up the stairs, this is what you see. So you suddenly see, again, megalithic blocks of granite perfectly fitted together, these curious knobs, which archaeologists cannot really explain, perfectly fitted together, and also large blocks, patches of lichen, indicating what would seem to be great age. So here's part of that wall again. So we're moving through. Once again, we'll look at it really closely. Perfectly fitted polygonal blocks. And this is what is so difficult. These little corners here. This would be very, very difficult to do. And mainstream archaeologists are saying, Yeah, the Incas are just bashing this out with a stone hammer in their hand and doing this. And it would seem to really be that, yeah, they're using power tools, and we'll get more into that. Eventually, as you get up to the main part of Ollantaytambo, this is what you see. You see giant blocks of red granite lying around, and you see this wall. This is the main wall, and this is the tourists go up and stand there and have photos taken. And it is 7 huge granite blocks here. And this is kind of a unique wall too, because it has these very thin sheets of granite between each one. Once again, we see some of these curious knobs. We don't know what they're for. And there's part of what's called an Andean cross is also cut into the rock right there. As you go around the corner to the right of this, you see this huge wall. Again, giant blocks of red granite weighing, say, up to 200 tons or something, are stacked there. Unusual pillows right here. We don't know what that's for. Once again, we have a notching here of this block. But then we have this crummy fill right here. And the mainstream archaeologists are saying, well, yeah, this is how the Incas wanted to build. They would just drag this giant block up here, and then they would just fill it in with this crummy rubber. And clearly, really, what we're seeing here is what we would call Atlantean construction or alien construction or even Anunnaki construction. And then here's your Inca construction right here. So as you're looking at Ollantaytambo like this, I mean, this is how it looks today. This is how it looked when the Spanish conquered Peru, and it's how it looked in the Inca times. And the Peruvian government, they can't move these blocks. No one can move them around. And in fact, not even the Incas. As you go up and you look at some of these blocks, you also see really this fine articulation. And these blocks are just lying around. This one, people have been bashing it with hammers and stuff. Really fine articulated edges, very smooth. I mean, it's perfectly smooth, like some saw has just cut it perfectly. And as you look at some of these blocks, we see this. And these are called keystone cuts. This is a keystone cut here, and this is a keystone cut right there. And here's a close-up. So keystone cuts are T-shaped or hourglass-shaped, and sometimes circular-shaped cuts in the stone in which molten metals are poured into it. And they only work because you're going to have another block that's fitted to it. So the metal clamp is then poured, and it's spanning 2 blocks of stone. And in fact, these giant blocks you wouldn't think are really going anywhere, but yet, in this unusual way of fitting giant blocks with keystone cuts and clamps is a way of additionally sort of holding these blocks together and keeping them from moving in say, earthquakes and things. So we'll go around the corner, and we're going to be seeing more of these keystone cuts as we go along. Now, this is another block, and it has a keystone cut in it too. Only this is a block that's in the wrong place. Keystone cuts have to be on a vertical surface. They can't be on a horizontal surface like this. And of course, another block of stone with a keystone cut would be on it, but it can't be like this. It's because molten metals have to be poured into it. It's got to be on a horizontal, flat surface. So this is a block of stone that's in the wrong place. Somebody has moved it. It's not meant to be here. So even in ancient times, somebody was moving this block and putting it in another place to use it for something else. We're now seeing Ollantaytambo from across the Urubamba River. We're on our way up to the quarry. Here is Ollantaytambo. It's up here on this knife ridge up here. You can see what is part of a ramp going up. And it's interesting to look at this field, which is a field of barley and corn and potatoes and stuff. But notice how it's an illusion of a pyramid right there, and even with a door and stuff. So they've actually created their field to be a sort of an illusion of a pyramid from the distance here. Now, mainstream archaeologists too are saying that, oh yeah, the Incas just had to get 1,000 guys all together hauling these giant blocks up this ramp, but they couldn't figure where all those people stood. when they got up onto the knife ridge. So that was a problem for them. And that's something we'll go on today a lot. I mean, the mainstream has to explain some of this stuff, and their explanations are worth examining. As you get up to the quarry, which is high up on a mountain on the other side of the Urubamba River, and these giant blocks then also had to cross this river, and they can't figure out how they did that. And you get up to the quarry. Most tourists never get up here. It's an all-day ride on horses. I've been up here like 3 times. And once you get up there, what you see is this huge scree field of red granite boulders are just lying around. And what the stonemasons did was they would take as big a boulder as they could and they would square it and dress it up here at the quarry. And here's one of the blocks here. So they're dressing this block. Notice the big lichen patches on it too. And in this case, they were starting to saw this block, but they stopped. There was some flaw they discovered in the rock. It probably had some crack that they didn't see before. And once they saw that crack, then they stopped quarrying it. And this is the same thing that happened to the unfinished obelisk in Aswan, if you go there. And in fact, you see how they were sawing it here, and it's like some giant saw was up there, just sawing these blocks of stone like a loaf of bread. Also, what's up there is this big stone wheel that's also been perfectly cut and smooth, like some Fred Flintstone wheel of the Stone Age or something. And the Incas supposedly didn't know about the wheel. And yet, allegedly, they're making giant stone wheels up at the quarry and then just leaving them there. All right, now let's go to Cuzco, back to Cuzco, and the famous Sun Temple in Cuzco, which is called the Quarry Concha. And it too is a megalithic building, but the Incas used it because it was an indestructible building, and they put their Sun Temple there. Much of it was wallpapered with sheets of gold. And you have this. You have these special doors at the Quarry Concha, the Sun Temple. And they have got, right now there's plexiglass right now the Peruvian government's put in front of it to protect it from all the tourists there. And it's very articulated. It's got drill holes, it's got little channels. It's like some kind of machine was placed in this door, and there was places for cables to go into it, like electrical cables. And perhaps it was like some kind of we don't know what was there, maybe like a big television screen or something like that. Mainstream archaeologists are saying, well, yeah, they did all this, and it was really to, hang some tapestries and, put some ropes on and stuff like that. All right, now we'll go up to the Altiplano, the high plateau of Peru and Bolivia, and we're right along the west side of Lake Titicaca, and this is a place called Cotimbo. Cotimbo is a place of buildings up on top of a high plateau. To go up there, you have to walk up these trails, and then you come up this trail here, up to a cliff right here, and then you get up to the top. And in fact, right just near the top is this place, which is also very kind of curious. It's like someone took this cliff wall, and then with some kind of power tool, they just cut along it here, and then they polished this whole part, and for no real reason. I mean, you can't see why they would do this. Again, it's just like they have power tools, and they're just playing with them, doing stuff, practicing, doing things with their power tools just because they can. Once you get up to the top of Cotimbo, you start to see these buildings. Some are towers, some are these square buildings. They're perfectly fitted, blocks of stone, and there's a pillow kind of shaping to them. And you start to see things like animals that are carved in relief on them. In many cases, serpents are very common, but there's other things too. Pumas, mountain lions are carved also in relief. And even to carve these things in relief, you have to cut the whole rest of the stone away and leave that little bit of a serpent or a fox or a puma or something there. What we saw also at Göbekli Tepe. These are some stones at a wall in Cuzco, and most of the stones there don't have serpents and things carved into them, but some of them do. So once again, we're seeing serpents just cut in relief in these stones. And if you go to northern Iraq, to the Yazidi temples that are up there, and this is the area of the Kurds, you also see their ancient temples have that too. They have these serpents caught into the rocks. And in fact, this is thought to be the oldest religion in the world, and coming ultimately from ancient Sumeria. And today they're more or less under siege by the conflict in Iraq and Syria. As you move farther along the western edge of Lake Titicaca, you come to this place, and it is this door that's carved into solid rock. It's a rocky ridge that's vertical coming out, and then there's this strange door. And this really wasn't discovered till about 15 years ago that tourists started to go to it. Although you can see it from the road, but it was just finally noticed, and people go there now. And so oftentimes tourists will stop and they'll go here. And as you get up there, this little indentation here, this is about the height of a person, about 6 feet tall. You have these channels, it's cut up here, also pretty good stone masonry. This white here is actually bird guano. People say that they have interdimensional experiences. Some people spend the night meditating here. It's sometimes called the Devil's Door, sometimes called the Gate of Amaru Muru, and some people say, yeah, it's a interdimensional doorway, a stargate, or something like that. And in Egypt, you have the same thing. You have these false doors. They're just caught into solid rock, and they're going nowhere. And this one is in Giza, near the pyramids, and it's very similar, almost identical false door. Here it's partly buried with rubble right there. Okay, so this is Lake Titicaca. Lake Titicaca is the highest navigable lake in the world. It's nearly 13,000 feet in the Andes. There's a lot of UFO activity here. People claim that they see, usually in the middle of the night, UFOs coming out of the lake, flying around. It's a very common belief there. There are underwater ruins in Lake Titicaca, especially around the Island of the Sun. Even Jacques Cousteau went there and did a special. He was also looking for underwater ruins. There was an Italian-German report from a few years ago, and these are divers. Diving in this lake is extremely difficult. You have to use mixed gases and stuff like that because of the high altitude. The water is also very cold. And they maintain that there was a gold obelisk underwater near the Gate of the Sun. One of the other oddball things about Lake Titicaca is that it has seahorses in it. And biologists can't really explain that. Seahorses normally live in the ocean, in tropical oceans, like around Indonesia and stuff like that. And that there would be seahorses in a lake at nearly 13,000 feet in the Andes is not something that's easily explained. And they can't explain it. James Churchward, who was a British colonel in India in the late 1800s, he later moved to the United States, and he wrote the famous book, The Lost Continent of Mu, and Nexus has that back there for sale. And he wrote a bunch of other books. He also, by the way, was the inventor of stainless steel, and he became a multimillionaire in the early 20s. Because he had a royalty from Bethlehem Steel because he was that inventor. So he was a pretty cool guy. And what he thought and claimed, he believed in this lost continent of Mu, and that South America had been somehow much down near ocean level, and the whole Amazon basin was a sea linked to the Atlantic, and that the area of Titicaca was kind of a Panama Canal of ancient times that was connected to the ocean. And then later, in some cataclysmic pole shift that rearranged the continents, South America was lifted up many thousands of feet to where it is now, and Lake Titicaca is like what's left of that. And in that kind of a cataclysmic pole shift, and Churchward believed in that, I mean, that would have sent massive tidal waves all over the world and to Australia. wiping out and washing over entire continents and things like that. So, near the southern edge of Lake Titicaca is the famous ruins of Tiwanaku. And this is the sun gate, they call it, at Tiwanaku. It's kind of the symbol of the city. It's a giant megalithic city built mainly out of andesite, a type of granite. You see here, this is what's called a monolithic doorway. It's actually been cracked by an earthquake or having been fallen over. You see here that coming down the side, it's perfectly straight, but then you have this circular notching, and then the wall carries on here, but slightly inward. So yeah, other massive walls and giant blocks would have been fitted together here. This guy in the middle is supposedly Viracocha, the ancient god of the Andes. He's wearing a big feathered headdress, the way we imagine American Indians with their big feathered headdresses and stuff. And he's got two scepters on either side, and he's also crying. There are tears coming down his cheeks. And they call those the tears of the sun. And archaeologists believe that that's symbolic of liquid metals that are coming from the site. And in fact, it would seem that Tiwanaku was at least at some point, a huge metallurgical factory inside for washing ores, processing ores, and ultimately refining gold and silver and copper and tin as well, creating bronze. Tiwanaku and Puma Punku were excavated in the 1920s and 30s by a Polish-German archaeologist named Arthur Poznański. Most of the site was ruins. He would dig up these giant statues. Some of them are 30, 40 feet tall. They've re-erected most of these. And these guys are standing there. They have, seems to be turbans on their head. They have strange goggle eyes. They have very long earlobes. They're usually barefoot. They're wearing a kind of fish scale pants and things like that. They're pretty strange looking guys, and it would appear to be the builders of Tiwanaku. Also, right in this area, the Bolivian archaeologists are doing quite a bit of digging and excavation all around Tiwanaku and Puma Punku right now. This is actually just started in the last 10 years or so. And this thing right here is very curious. It's like it's of interest to a very small tunnel system that's going inside the city. And this is all underground now. It goes to pyramid structures. They don't know where this goes, what it does. But it would seem that there were tunnels and passageways, probably for water, that was pouring all through the city. And the city itself was some kind of canal city. It had huge volumes of water that was being washed through it, and they diverted rivers. It's rivers that were coming from Lake Titicaca. And in fact, when I was here, they had a sign here not to take photos of this for some reason. They didn't want people to know about these strange tunnels here, and I don't know why. In this same area is the famous underground temple, they call it. It has all these faces that are around it. And it has this statue here, which is the famous Kon-Tiki statue. The Norwegian archaeologist Thor Heyerdahl made this famous, actually. They called him Kon-Tiki. He has a big mustache and a beard. And American Indians do not have facial hair. They cannot grow a mustache. They cannot grow a beard. They don't shave at all. So American Indians do not have beards or mustaches. He is also holding his hands in what's called the famous tiki position. One hand over your heart and one hand over your stomach. And this is, if you go to Tahiti and New Zealand, you will get little tiki pendants in greenstone or something. They're going to have that exact same position. That's the tiki position. Hand over your heart and hand over your stomach. So here we have really a connection to Pacific Islands. Also here at Tiwanaku is this pyramid, the Acapana Pyramid. It's largely destroyed now because Spanish dug it up and they thought there was some treasure here. And what was there was an Andean cross, like a Swiss cross, and it was a pool at the very top. And somehow, this was like a reservoir for the water that they forced through the passageways in Tiwanaku, in my mind, probably to wash the ores, to get all the metals and stuff. And just to have a lake up on top of this pyramid, they would have had to pump water uphill, using some kind of a ram pump or something, forcing water uphill into this reservoir. So the whole place of Tiwanaku was pre-planned. It's a perfectly made site, although it's been utterly destroyed, and we'll see more of that too. So here we go. Here's where Lake Titicaca is in South America. The pause's here. Tiwanaku's right in this area. The famous Nazca Plain is down here in the desert, right around here. Lima, the capital Peru's over here. And this is what Lake Titicaca looks like. This is a satellite photo. Lake Titicaca is divided into two big lakes. This one they call the Greater Lake, and parts of Titicaca are very, very deep. This part over here is extremely deep, about 1,000 feet deep. And then there's the Lesser Lake over here. It's shallower. Tiwanaku's like right down here. This area of the lake is famous. I've been told by my Bolivian guides and other people that this is an area also of UFO activity, and that there's underwater ruins in that part of the lake, and they believe there's a sunken city there. So here's another map, the smaller lake. About half of Lake Titicaca is in Peru, the other half's in Bolivia, and here's this area with the sunken city and a lot of UFO activity, Tiwanaku down over here. Also on Lake Titicaca are the famous reed boats that they're making. Thor Heyerdahl went here to get his reed boat makers to do his trans-Pacific and transatlantic voyages. These kind of reed boats are also made in Morocco and Egypt and in Iraq, also on Easter Island too. Reed boats like this are unsinkable. They have a shallow draft. They can go over coral reefs very easily, and even if the boat breaks up, it won't sink, and all parts of it will float. Ramiro Gonzalez is a Bolivian artist whose book I got when I was in Bolivia one time, and he was fascinated with Tiwanaku, and I liked his art, so I would put it in my presentation. He imagined Tiwanaku too as being this big watery canal city with water flowing all through it, and there are canals around there. Mainstream archaeologists admit that there are all these canals, though they don't know exactly what they were for. So this was his envision of sort of what it would have looked like with all this artificial canals and waters and lakes and rivers that are part of Tiwanaku. You would have boated around it. Like Churchward, he envisioned South America as a kind of long, thin continent that was more down near the ocean, something like New Zealand or Norway or something, with fjords and stuff like that. There had been a pole shift that had moved it around. And about a kilometer or so, just to the north of the main ruins of Tiwanaku, is Puma Punku. And Puma Punku has some of the most interesting ruins. There's my wife Jennifer walking around, these giant slabs of sandstone and granite. Puma Punku is a mixture of sandstone and granite. Massive slabs weighing hundreds of tons, just tossed around like some little kid's blocks. And what you see there too are these keystone cuts. So we'll start to see more of these keystone cuts, and these are huge ones too. These are in giant slabs of sandstone. Molten metals would be poured into this. There would have been huge metallic clamps of bronze or something like that. And we saw that earlier at Ollantaytambo, but Ollantaytambo, according to the mainstream, that's built by the Incas. But Tiwanaku is absolutely pre-Inca, mainstream admits that, and it's many, many thousands of years old. So this is really indication that what is attributed to the Incas is, the Incas didn't build any of that stuff, and it's pre-Incan. So this is what you pretty much see today when you go to Puma Punku, giant, these slabs standing around, pieces of building blocks, the whole place has been destroyed. This is actually in the front, this is a big granite slab, there's sandstone slabs. These are some of these H blocks and other megaliths that are finely cut. We'll see more of those in a minute. You have blocks of stone like this with these perfectly cut trapezoid type markings and really complicated articulation right here, and it's being cut. Just somebody apparently with their power tools is cutting this, and it's really a form of decoration. Although mainstream archaeologists are saying, again, oh yeah, they're just, they're bashing this out with a stone hammer in their hand and just making, they have some kind of chisel tool, of course, to do this perfectly smooth, but all of this kind of just excessive decoration that's completely unnecessary and would appear to be very difficult to do. More shots of what it looks like moving around Puma Punku. Again, more of these giant keystone cuts. You wouldn't think that these giant slabs would need this at all, but the builders decided that they did. More of the keystone cuts, some of them are circular. Here we are with the Ancient Aliens show. We're filming one of the episodes. These are the famous H blocks that were kind of like Lego blocks. More keystone cuts. More keystone cuts. This is typical of what's there. The keystone cuts are never, and the clamps are never really seen. There are always other blocks on top of it. It's only when you dismantle these blocks that you can really see these things. There's a friend of mine, a British engineer who now lives in the United States. His name is Chris Dunn. Good friend of mine, and he's very much an engineer, runs a machine shop in Illinois. And he's now using his special tools to look at a block of granite that has saw marks. It's perfectly cut. So he's examining it here, and what we're really looking at is special saw marks right there. So these saw marks are really over here. It's somebody with a power saw has gone there, perfectly cut it along, and then it's drilled, and small little holes are made in. And this all has to really be done with a power tool. And that's what he's really examining it carefully, just to see, yeah, I mean, could this really be done with just simple hand tools and things like that? And according to him, no, you need to have power tools to do it. This is typical trenching that archaeologists do. They go out and they just find an area that looks interesting to them. They dig a big trench to see if there's something underneath. And what they're finding out here is, yeah, cut-blown stone blocks, and again, these keystone cuts. So the keystone cuts are all over the place there at Puma Punku and at Tiwanaku too. And this is the back part of Puma Punku. They don't let you go here anymore. And what you see here is these blocks of granite that are lying here on these pillars of mud and muck. And what seems to be evident here is that some massive tidal wave, cataclysm, just hit Puma Punku and Tiwanaku, wiped it out, buried it in tons of mud and muck. Probably some kind of tidal wave flood coming from Lake Titicaca, destroyed the buildings, and even today, these blocks of stone are just sitting here on the mud and muck from that cataclysmic destruction. Back in Tiwanaku, which is about a kilometer away, this is part of a monolithic door. You see how it's all cut. And then this area here was some kind of flaw, or it had been chipped and stuff, and it's some kind of like super concrete that the ancients had poured in here just to fill in this chipped part of this block of stone, which would have been standing up. And this is also right in the same vicinity. This is part of some kind of ancient doorway or wall. And what's curious here is how it's perfectly curved along this section, like it's been cut with a lathe or something that's cutting the granite block. And as Christopher Dunn would explain to me, who runs these machine shops and does all this stuff all the time, like this side of the block is perfectly straight, perfectly smooth granite, and so is this part. But what is difficult, he says, is to bring two surfaces together. One, a curved surface here, and then this one, a flat surface. And just bashing something out with a rock in your hand, or even just like a bronze chisel, you can't really do this. This is something that has to be done with literally computer-controlled power tools that are cutting these stone blocks. And he, and myself, we're convinced that that's what's going on here. This is one of the monolithic doors that's at Tiwanaku. It's broken, it's lying on its face. And you see here the little sockets underneath it that when it was standing up, some kind of stone or metal socket pillar would be there to set the monolithic door in, to keep holding it upright. Here we have another view, other little indentations and sockets. These are all for something on the slab so that it would fit in and keep it standing up. Now, you also have these monolithic doors at Persepolis in Iran, and they are identical to the monolithic doors that you have at Tiwanaku. And they're one solid piece of granite that's been cut. It's a doorway. Over here is a window. This is one solid piece of granite. It's been cut. I mean, this is an extremely difficult way of making a doorway. And they're making these things to be indestructible. And even with these jambs and this on the inside where they articulate this jamb in three sides, that's also what you see at Tiwanaku. This is a diagram of just how complicated these doorways are. Cutting them out of solid rock, I mean, they're perfectly cut and articulated. This is not something you're going to do with just a rock hammer in your hand. This is what one of the clamps looks like when you pour the metal clamps into the keystone cuts. So they have these clamps, they find them occasionally, but most of them are gone because wandering tribes are going through and they just take those clamps and they hammer it into a dagger or a spearhead or a sword or something like that because these metals are so valuable. Now we're in Egypt, and these are keystone cuts that are in Egypt. And these are at Karnak Temple near Luxor. So you have hourglass type keystone cuts here. This one's what we call an axe head keystone cut. And you see here on one side of the block or the other. So in ancient Egypt, they were doing this too. And this is an unusual way of fitting ancient blocks and megalithic blocks of stone together. This is a wall at Edfu in southern Egypt. And it also has keystone cuts in it, but this is all completely in the wrong place. These are stones that were assembled by the ancient Egyptians themselves, but they're all in the wrong place. I mean, they've really dismantled some other building and then made this wall. And they've actually put a couple of blocks together where there would be two keystone cuts together, but others are just by themselves. And you can't have a keystone cut on a vertical wall like this anyway. I mean, all these stones are not meant to be here. They're from some other structure, and the keystone cuts that are there, they're probably were the clamps and everything was for really something else. All right, now let's go to Vietnam. And this is a megalithic site in central Vietnam near Da Nang called My Son. And My Son is a megalithic city, and it also has these same T-shaped keystone cuts, just like at Ollantaytambo, at Tiwanaku, the exact same thing. It also has the hourglass keystone cuts that you see at Egypt. And this is basalt, actually. So this is extremely hard stone. And when I was here at My Son some years ago, I pointed these out to our tour guide. And I said, yeah, do you see these keystone cuts that are here? And he had never seen them before. He had no idea what they were. I had to explain them to him. And I told him exactly, what they're all about and whatnot. He had never noticed them. And it's not part of the archaeology there. And he thanked me. He's like, yeah, cool. And notice here too, the articulation at this bottom side. Also, this has been sawn by power saws and stuff. And for whatever reason, yeah, there's little notches and edges right here that don't have to be there and could only really be made by power tools. This is what parts of My Son look like today. And this is right on near the border of what was North Vietnam and South Vietnam, and a lot of the fighting in the Vietnam War was around this area, and even this whole site was bombed. Now, who built My Son? Here's Da Nang over here. My Son's actually over here. It was the Cam people. They're the ones who are attributed to these buildings. Now, the Cam were a mysterious seafaring people, and in fact, we get the name Kampuchea and Cambodia. It comes from these people. And this was their main capital, was this island just off of Vietnam. And if you go to Da Nang, there's a museum for the Cam. And you see the Cam people were really Hindus who later became Buddhists. And this is a picture of Shiva. Notice how he's got very kind of wide, thick lips and a wide nose. He doesn't really look very much like a Southeast Asian today or a Vietnamese. Here's another Cam guy. He's got curly, dark hair. He also has a wide nose and thick lips. There's a lot of good statues. This is also a statue that what was there at Mison. This is supposed to be Shiva. Notice the third eye in the middle of his forehead. And he's wearing his hair in this top knot method, which is also what sadhus in India still wear today. The holy men who go underground, they have very long hair and they tie it in a knot up in their head. And that's also what the statues at Easter Island have their hair like this too. This is also a statue, a Cam statue at Mison. And he's got the wide nose and the thick lips and stuff. And in fact, he looks very Mayan. And if you were to show a picture, this statue, to somebody in Mexico or something, they would say, oh yeah, that's a Mayan statue right there. But it's actually from Vietnam. Here's another Cam statue. He's like Kon-Tiki. He's got a big, thick mustache and a beard, and he's also got the long earlobes. Always depictions of Buddha always have him with very, very long earlobes. And here's a woman who's also a Cam. She's probably depicting Parvati, the consort of Shiva. And at Angkor Wat, which is in Cambodia, and it was really Hindu temples that were later recarved into Buddhist temples. And they have the keystone cuts there and the clamps. And when I was there the first time in 1998, Japanese archaeologists were so excited that they had found these metal clamps there at Angkor Wat, just like at Tiwanaku and at Mison and in Egypt. And at Angkor Wat too, you have these, what appear to be these monolithic doors and windows, very similar to what's at Tiwanaku. This is a megalithic movement from an island off Sumatra called Nias. And this is a photo taken about 1915 by the Dutch. And this is a rare photo. So you can see how, yeah, it is possible to manhandle some giant megalith. In this case, they're probably moving some megalith that was somewhere else. And the chief said, well, we got to move it over here now. And so the whole, tribe came together and built this whole cage and moved it. Also in Indonesia, on the island of Sulawesi, is a very oddball valley called Bada Valley. And it has some very unusual statues that we're going to see. This is Sulawesi, Bada Valley in the middle of this part. It's a remote area, and in fact, roads were only built to Bada Valley about 10 years ago. And this is what Bada Valley looks like when you get there. It's got these oddball megaliths in it. It's a gold mining area. And in fact, the Indonesians claim this is where the earliest form of rice was created. And that primitive rice and rice fields were all started here in Bada Valley. As you walk around Bada Valley, you start to see these unusual kind of tiki-type statues. They're cut out of granite, and they're just in farmers' fields. Archaeologists say that they're 6,000 years old or so. They don't know who built them. The people who live in Bada Valley, they don't know anything about them. They don't really do anything with them. They're just sitting out there. And this is one of the largest ones to come up to, and we'll look at him real carefully. You see here the way his nose is, and even finely cut parts of him. Let's look at it here. Yeah, I mean, even his eyes and his nose, I mean, this statue is supposedly 6,000 years old, but it's just, it's perfectly cut. And once again, it would seem that power tools are being used to cut these statues, and they make them virtually indestructible. The other thing that's at Bada Valley, which is very strange, are these huge granite jars. And they're these vessels. They're also just out in the middle of people's fields. They don't know who built them. They don't know what they were for. They're cut out of a single granite boulder. They're hollowed out, and they're made into like a giant wine amphora or something like that. People just have them. They just leave them there in their fields, and you walk around and you look at them. There's hundreds of them. You can see this one, it's broken and very narrow cut just the walls of these granite jars and things. I mean, and to make these would seem to be very difficult, although, again, if you have power tools, it wouldn't be hard to do at all. And there's a place just like this in north-central Laos called the Plain of Jars. And it also has all of these granite jars that are just hollowed out and sitting in the plain, and archaeologists are baffled by it. They have no idea who did it or why. So this is kind of the same thing. It's all just, you know, archaeologists are baffled all by this. Also, in northern Cambodia is this site called Preah Vihear. It's like a Machu Picchu on top of a mountain right on the Cambodian-Thai border. And it's only been the last few years that tourists could go here because the Thai army and the Cambodian army were fighting over this site. And it's on the edge of a cliff. It also has huge lichen patches. It has monolithic doorways in it. It's perfectly fitted blocks of granite, huge lichen patches. It's quite an astonishing sight. And you also have keystone cuts here too, just like also in Angkor Wat. So here we have also the same T-shaped cuts here at Preah Vihear, like it. This is it, the same kind that are at Tiwanaku. And by the way, mainstream archaeologists are saying there is no connection. There can't be a connection. There's absolutely no connection between any of these sites. And this is what they have to say, because this site cannot be connected to what's in Peru and Bolivia or even in Egypt. And what they would have to say is that these people are just utterly independently doing this on their own and creating it. And there can't be a connection. We'll go back now to Tiwanaku and Puma Punku. And archaeologists are looking at these H blocks and the buildings there and trying to reconstruct it. And architects, and they're looking at that. You have also the blocks of stone that are, again, heavily articulated. I mean, this really has to be done with power tools, all these small little lapping and little shells and stuff. I mean, this is not something that you're going to do with a stone hammer in your hand. You have to have power tools for this. And again, you're cutting granite when you do it. And part of these stones are built with these famous H blocks. And they're like these Lego blocks that are very uniform and very articulated and fitted together. And so you have these there. It's like some factory with a CAD computer program was just cutting these blocks, and there would be granite, and then spewing them out, and then later they're to be fitted together. So let's have a look at how that would work. So you have these blocks, they're all very uniform, they fit together like a Lego block, and then they have other blocks that can be inserted behind them, and they all lock in together, and they're going to be this ultimately some giant wall of highly articulated, fitted granite blocks. And I have to thank Eric von Daniken for this animation, which is great. So it's showing you really how complicated and sophisticated this whole thing is. It just can't really be done by primitive means of just bashing things out. You've got to have power tools to do this. So anyway, some other artists' impressions of what it all looks like. And here we go. At the museum at Tiwanaku, they have this artist depiction, and you have the H blocks and other ones here, and they're fitted together. Here we are. Here's the keystone cuts. They're pouring molten metals to fit in there. But once again, you know, it's a mixture of super high tech with very primitive. And you know, the guy's over here with his campfire, you know, melting some metals, and you know, they're wearing these simple cotton tunics. You know, they're not dressed in some fancy way or anything like that. So yeah, you know, this is what the mainstream has to say. Yeah, you know, these guys are just a bunch of primitive guys. They don't know writing. They don't know the wheel or anything. But you know, they're going to do some pretty amazing stuff. So also near to Tiwanaku is a pyramid. And this is a man-made pyramid. You can see it from Tiwanaku, but it's not recognized as an authentic archaeological site. And the Bolivian government, they've turned a blind eye to this, and it's because there's a village here, and that village is looting this pyramid. And they're doing their own private excavation of this pyramid site and taking artifacts, and they're selling it. And in Bolivia's, kind of doesn't have a lot of rules and regulations, and stuff like this can happen. And I asked our guide, he was the one telling us about this, and I said, wow, let's go there. We gotta see this thing. And we were able to drive part of the way, but we only, we got up this dirt road, and we could see the village right there, and he stopped the minibus, and he said, we can't go any farther than this. He said, the villagers will not let us into the village. And, they privately, keep everyone out because they're looting the site, essentially. Now, the things that came out of this pyramid are some interesting objects. One is the Potiki monolith. The Potiki monolith is a granite statue that's 3-4 feet high, and it's been broken, and it's got a turban on. And along the side of his thigh, on both sides, is Sumerian writing. So Sumerian writing is on this granite monolith. Sumerian experts have looked at it, and they've said, yeah, this is Sumerian writing. Today, this monolith is in the Gold Museum, the Museum of Precious Metals in La Paz, but it's not on display. So, there are photos of it, and when we went there with Ancient Aliens once, because Ancient Aliens paid them, they brought it out of this vault, and we were all able to examine it and photograph it, and it is part of an episode of Ancient Aliens. And here's some of the Sumerian symbols that are on the Potiki monolith. The Sumerians wrote in hieroglyphs. They had a number of languages and written scripts. They had hieroglyphic symbols, and they also had cuneiform writing. Now, what is also in the museum, the Precious Metals Museum in La Paz, and this is Bolivia's official museum, is this, and this is called the Fuente Magna Bowl. And the Fuente Magna Bowl is on display, although you're not supposed to take photos of it. But, who's going to not take a photo, when they're there? And it has Sumerian writing on it, too. It has cuneiform writing right here, and this is a ceramic bowl. And it has Sumerian hieroglyphic writing on the other side. And in fact, here we go. We'll look at it here. Here's the hieroglyphic writing. Here's the cuneiform writing. And this is the guy who found it. In fact, Maximiliano, he lived near that pyramid that I was showing you, and he actually found the Fuente Magna Bowl in 1960. And he just used it in his yard. He put it in his backyard, and he used it to feed his pigs with. And then one day, a priest noticed this bowl and all that, and he thought it was a curious bowl, and he thought, there's something, this bowl needs to be in a museum. And what they did was they traded him a house for it. And he got kind of a new mud brick house, and then they brought the bowl to La Paz. But that was 1960. And for all those years, they just kept it out of display. And then finally, around 2005, they put the bowl on display, and it is, now if you go to the Precious Metals Museum in La Paz, you will see it. This is something that cannot be there. In mainstream archaeology, this is an impossible artifact. It simply cannot be there. It is a time bomb. This is a minefield in archaeology. There cannot be a Sumerian bowl in Bolivia. This upsets all of mainstream archaeology and turns it on its head. This thing, and it's officially in Bolivian Museum. And I'm convinced that if this bowl had been found in Peru, it would not be in a museum. Bolivia is something of a rogue nation. They don't want other countries telling them what to do, and that's a good thing, I think. But in Peru is more, they're going to do what the mainstream archaeologists tell them. And if this was in a museum in Peru, American archaeologists or others would go there and they would say, take this off display. This is not something you should have in your museum, because it can't be there. I mean, Sumerians cannot have gone to ancient Tiwanaku and have built it. And in fact, this would, in a sense, show that the Anunnaki had been there and were the builders of this. And in fact, this Sumerian writing, this is from 4,000, 5,000 BC. So this is just something that cannot be there. And in fact, National Geographic or some other major archaeological magazine, they will never, ever talk about it. They can't. It just upsets everything. And it will only be, all they can do is ignore it. And just ignore it, never talk about it. But it shows like Ancient Aliens where you actually will see artifacts like this. And it's in a museum. It's completely real. This is some of the Sumerian hieroglyphs that you might see. So at Tiwanaku, if you go to the museum, this is a ceramic. This is what the Aymara Indians, people who look like around there today. And it's said that Aymara is supposedly a Sumerian. They're speaking ancient Sumerian. He's got the big nose. He's wearing a turban, typical Bolivian type Indian. But these are guys from Tiwanaku too. Like, look at this guy. He looks very, very Oriental, like he's some Chinese guy. And then the guy up here, he's some Tiwanaku guy too, but he's got a thick mustache and a beard. He's a Tiwanaku guy too, but he looks like he's from Mediterranean or some Phoenician guy or something. This is a display that's at the museum there at Tiwanaku of some of the unusual craniums. And in fact, they've taken this off display. You cannot see it now. And what you would see there would be some of these guys, elongated skulls, like this one. He's got unusually elongated skull. And now we'll see more of that. So let's go to Peru now and to the desert areas of Peru. We're going to go to Paracas right here, and also this town here, Ica. It's the main capital. This has a major museum. Nazca, all the famous lines, it's down here. Lima, the capital of Peru, is up here. And this is very much a desert area of Peru. And you get, here, because it is so dry, you're going to get a lot of these unusual craniums, including like this guy. He's got an elongated skull. And these guys. And they're all from Paracas, from Ica, people with extremely elongated skulls, easily double the size of our skull, of our cranium. And I mean, some of these guys look pretty unusual. There are ways, archaeologists know this, of taking babies and binding their head, and while they're still infants and the plates in their head haven't fused together yet, you bind the skull and then you force it into this elongated shape, but then it's still going to fuse up here, and there's various problems and stuff with that. This guy here from Chongos, he's one of the more extreme elongated skulls. Not the kind of guy you want to meet in a dark alley, probably. And those skulls are coming here from this, in many cases, from this pyramid that's a ruined pyramid called the Chongos Pyramid. Here's a close-up. So a lot of these skulls are coming out of here. So again, some of these guys, I mean, some of them have kind of boxy heads, and there's still hair on them. They're very well preserved. These are absolutely real. The Peruvian archaeologists and everybody, I mean, these are official museums that we're taking them out of. Now this skull is particularly unusual, and this may be really evidence of an alien, some kind of alien skull, because of the way that he's an elongated conehead guy too. But what's happened here is that the seams at the top of his head are not the way a normal human's head would come together and ultimately knit, and as you become an adult, your skull is going to be complete and will stop growing. So with this guy, yeah, what he has is this just one seam here on the top of his skull, without the other seams going in the back. So the idea is here that are there some people who are naturally have these elongated heads, and they're not being manipulated. They're not. It's not a binding technique like foot binding or something like that. They naturally look this way, and that is the big question. And even the people who do head binding and this cranial deformation, shall we call it, they wonder if, okay, some people are doing this artificially, but why are they doing it? They're trying, at the very least, they're trying to imitate other people. And they're saying that, yeah, the gods, the ancient kings, where they all look like this, so we want to look like them. And so, and even small infants or fetuses that also have these elongated heads, this is the kind of thing they're looking for. You have other techniques too that are done, which is called tree panning. And tree panning is where you're using a saw or a drill and you're cutting a hole in the head. And we don't exactly know why they were doing this. It kind of is like brain surgery of some sort. And this guy, this is from a museum in Lima, and he had a gold plate put in his head. And he survived all this, and later his skull grew over the gold plate, and he lived for many years after he'd had this big cut in his head. You have also many of the skulls. Not everybody has these elongated skulls. I mean, some of them are, some of them aren't. And many of them have red hair, which is an unusual thing too. Also in this area is what's called the Candlestick of the Andes. This is this huge sort of candlestick thing that's etched into a mountain that can be seen from the ocean and easily seen from the air as well. Would seem to be some kind of indicator saying to either ancient mariners and to even people in airships, yeah, this is the place right here. And even that, Tiwanaku or something it's over that way. As you go farther south, then you get into the famous Nazca Plain with all of its many lines and figures and things like that. And tomorrow, Eric Von Don is going to show you a lot more about this, and he has some great video and stuff of it. These elongated skulls are also in Mexico, and the ancient Olmecs who lived in central Mexico, they had the elongated skulls too. They were doing all this. And there's some Olmec guys from Comacalco. This is what they look like. These big eyes, also wide noses, thick lips. They have elongated heads. And you have some of these guys, too, who have their heads smashed in, and we call them pumpkin heads. And so rather than having an elongated skull, they have this smashed out pumpkin skull. This one is from the museum in Mérida in the Yucatan, and would be some Mayan or Olmec or Toltec skull. So this is the kind of binding that you would use on an infant's head. Really, you want to do this to very young, babies who are just, 6 months old or something like that. And then you do it gradually throughout their years up to probably around the time they're 6 or 7 or 8 years old or something like that. So that would be the techniques. Now the Olmecs were a group that were completely unknown to archaeologists until 1940. And up to that time, mainstream archaeologists were saying that the Mayans were the oldest civilization group in Mesoamerica and Mexico. But then archaeologists realized that there was this other civilization before them. And they didn't have a name for them. They called them the Olmecs, the rubber people. And in 1940, they brought archaeologists from all over the world to Mexico City at this big conference where they announced this new culture, and they called it the Olmecs. And the Olmecs are these pre-Mayans. They're a megalithic culture. They have these giant basalt heads called colossal heads. They weigh about 20 tons each. They're found in Guatemala. They're found on the Gulf Coast of Mexico, particularly in the oil area. They're buried in swamps. Most of these heads had to be dug out with bulldozers and stuff. There's a lot of oil exploration in that area. They're in Guatemala too, where they just would find them in sugarcane fields and uncover them. Huge basalt boulders and things like that. Many of them look, again, very African, in fact. Some of them are very, very finely cut. Notice the thick lips and the wide nose here. He's wearing some kind of strange like helmet or turban. He looks very African, really. And also like the Cam guys in Vietnam. And again, mainstream is saying like, oh yeah, no, these are just American Indians. Yeah, they look like Africans, but they're not Africans. And they were buried. I mean, they weren't people didn't find these until 1930s when they started digging up and bulldozing through these swamps and stuff in the Tabasco area, particularly of eastern Mexico. And what they found there too was that cities like La Venta, which they think was the capital city of the Olmecs, that it was a pre-planned city, that it had a very sophisticated irrigation and water systems were all part of it. And the whole area of the Olmecs, the heartland area, is what's called the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. It's the narrowest part of Mexico. So Comacalco is up here in La Venta, we were just looking at. But this area here too, on the Pacific, is also an Olmec area. And Monte Alban, which is a city, it's also an Olmec city, that there they cut the top of this mountain off. So the Olmecs were on the Pacific and Atlantic side. And it was they could control both trade on both oceans. This is an Olmec statue too. This is at Jalapa, one of the big Olmec sites and Olmec museums. And look at this guy. He's got a false beard, just like Egyptians would have. And even his headdress is very much a sort of Egyptian cowl kind of thing that Egyptians famously wore. He's an Olmec too. He's an Olmec statue, and he's holding a rubber ball. These are the guys who invented the ball game. And the rubber ball games that we use today for basketball and baseball and football and all the ball games really started here. This is an Olmec head too, and this is an unusual one. And mainstream archaeologists noticed this, that something was going on here. This is a basalt head, weighs about 20 tons, but it's got all these dish marks on it. And archaeologists also thought this was strange. Somebody, with like a power tool, just was defacing this. I mean, they were just decided they had a power tool, and they didn't like this guy anymore, and they just stick in their power tool, their grinder or whatever, and they're just dishing out his little dish marks on it, just because they could. And they're defacing it. And archaeologists were baffled by how and why people would do this. It just didn't make sense. The same thing was going on in the back of a statue that's also an Olmec statue in the Villa Hermosa Park in the same area. And it's like somebody was taking their power drill and just dishing out little drill spots and just playing with their power tools, just because they could, practicing with all the tools and stuff that they have. At Comacalco, which is an Olmec site and later became a Mayan site, this display was there. And I thought it was a really cool display, and it's showing all these different ceramics and figurines and stuff that they had found at Comacalco. And it was all pretty bizarre. I mean, here's a kind of standard-looking Olmec guy over here, and you have this strange guy, and it's a standard Olmec guy. But then you have guys like this guy here, looking very Chinese. This guy up here also looks very Oriental. All these different, this guy here, all these weird guys. Some of them have the famous, they call it the Olmec frown. They have taken this off display. You cannot see this there anymore. Again, archaeologists went there and they just thought this was just too weird to have in the museum. And they told him, take this off display. You know, it just looks too strange for tourists to look at. So you won't see this anymore. This is also an Olmec votive offering made out of jade. It was found at La Venta, but today it's at the big museum in Mexico City. And these are what are called jade celts. This is all jade. These are these Olmec figurines. They have elongated skulls. They look kind of Oriental, but also sort of Negroid at the same time. And there's a kind of early writing and inscriptions on the back of these celts. And in 1999, they brought from Beijing, China, they bought the top epigrapher on Shang Chinese glyphs to look at these glyphs here. And Shang Chinese glyphs are the earliest of all Chinese writing, going back to 4,000, 5,000 BC. And he said that the glyphs on the back of these jade celts was Shang Chinese writing. That's what he said. You also have these deformed heads in Egypt, and Akhenaten and Nefertiti also had these elongated heads. This is one of their daughters, Meritaten, and she's a conehead too. She's got this big, elongated head. And this is not the result of incest or anything like that. This is a purposefully done elongated of the head, or else I'd just look like this. And we find this too in the Kurdistan, in the Kurds and Yazidis. You'll still find this. In Malta, they also have these elongated heads. And even Tutankhamun, he was a conehead too. And statues in his own tomb depict him as having this elongated head. Although you never hear about it when you read all these articles about Tutankhamun stuff, they never talk about him having this elongated head. Also, a trunk in Tutankhamun's tomb contained 12 boomerangs, and they're on display at the Cairo Museum. And the Egyptians also used boomerangs too. So boomerangs were used all over the world. Tutankhamun he loved boomerangs. And boomerangs have been found in Poland and in Denmark and in Florida, also in the American Southwest. If you go to Iraq, and these are the famous Ubaid figures from northern Iraq, from an excavated town called Ubaid, and they have what archaeologists call the coffee bean eyes. They also have these elongated heads. These are authentic. They're ceramic figurines. And archaeologists think that, yeah, these are the Anunnaki guys, the coffee bean eyes, elongated heads, and I mean, this is totally real. So, yeah, we're now looking at that, and these are Sumerians. So these are the Sumerian figures of these cone heads, and then, of course, we have the Sumerian writing at the Fuente Magnable at Tiwanaku. Even in ancient China, they depict many of the Taoist immortals were depicted as having these big, elongated heads, some of them pretty extreme, and the pumpkin heads as well. And in China, you don't get a lot of skeletal material because you need to really preserve these ancient skulls and stuff. You need a really dry environment. Korea, too, excavations there, they've found these elongated skulls. And even the Chinook Indians near Seattle, they were famous for this too, having these pointed heads and elongated heads. And it's something they were doing to manipulate. The island of Vanuatu also is famous for having the elongated heads and things like that. And they're doing that just up until today. There's still some island of Vanuatu where they're still elongating little kids' heads. And so we know that that the heads can be manipulated on little babies. We know that. There's no question of that. But it's why they're doing it, and whether some people actually naturally have these elongated heads. This is from the northern Congo in Africa. This was a photo taken by a Dutch anthropologist about 1920. This little kid, his head is bound. He's going to be a conehead. And this is what a baby whose head has been bound as an infant would look like. There's just people are doing this all over the world. And to say the least, this is an unusual thing to do. But once again, mainstream archaeologists are saying, well, there's no connection between any of these people. They're all doing it completely independently for no real reason that they can think of. And there's absolutely no connection between any of these cultures and this worldwide head binding that's going on in the coneheads. This is an interesting thing. Let's just go the other way to small mini people. This was the Pedro Mountain mummy, which was discovered in 1930 in Wyoming. And these prospectors were out there. This thing's it's about 1.5 feet high. He was in a meditative posture. These prospectors were dynamited this cliff looking for veins of gold and stuff. And what suddenly emerged was this small cave, and this little man was sitting there in a meditative, like lotus position, and they took photos of him. They brought him to Chicago. There they X-rayed him, and he's totally real. Only he's this tiny miniature person, and in fact, it was said by people who know a lot of are experts in yoga positions that he's in a special yoga position that's has a name and everything. And I'm not really familiar exactly what that one would be. He vanished. And in 1950, he was sold to somebody who said, yeah, I'll buy that. And, You know, he's cool, how much do you want? And after that, it was never seen again. Nobody knows where it is. I mean, apparently somebody bought him to get him off out of the mainstream view and make sure he wasn't in a museum. And today he's completely missing, and that's why there's a $10,000 reward for this guy. The salmon ruins in New Mexico, they also found these slabs which had elephants on them. So that's interesting. We'll go real quickly now to Bogota in Colombia. We were just there, and there's some unusual things there. It's starting in the 1930s. They began excavating. They started finding all these giant statues that were there. Weird kind of stuff, many of it very Egyptian, very Olmec, just buried in these mountain jungle areas. It's a gold mining area. A lot of these guys had kind of gorgon, big teeth, and vampire teeth and stuff like that. Others, they're holding unusual things. They have collars and stuff. Finally made granite blocks, weird buildings. Again, giant basalt sarcophagi, all of it just buried. This is what the area looks like right now. There's dolmens. Here are these strange things. Here, look at this guy. Very similar to Bada Valley with his eyes and his nose. Very finely cut. I mean, this again, it would be only done with power tools on very hard granite blocks. This is what it looks like, dolmens and things. You see these guys, weird looking guys. Very strange. Some of them have oddball things on their backs, like jetpacks or something like that. And here's a woman, also very well made. She's wearing this oddball hat. This guy, he was a ceramic. They call him the spaceman. He's a cool looking guy. So apparently this is, what these guys look like. They were making this stuff at San Agustin and Tierra Dentro there in Western Colombia. The Gold Museum in Bogota has many of the gold artifacts that came out of this area, like this guy. Some are some pretty interesting, futuristic, sci-fi looking dudes. This guy's, I call him the fireman. Seems to have a big mustache and stuff. There's big gold sun discs and stuff like that was at the Quarry Concha. Even things that look like big saw blades and stuff like that. Gold is too soft to actually make machines, although this is some kind of gold alloy. When you have a lot of gold, you can use it as an alloy. And also, even crystal artifacts and jade artifacts that are drilled through quartz crystal. So, and to drill through a quartz crystal like that would require power tools and drills and things like that to drill through the very difficult quartz. This guy here, he's also from that area. He's a conehead. He's got the elongated head, just like we were seeing in Egypt and stuff. The same people. This is like an Olmec site. Of course, mainstream archaeologists are saying, oh no, these are some isolated people just doing all this on their own, being weird. This guy's cool, ceramic, looks quite oriental. And when you go to and there in the Gold Museum is a display of these gold airplanes. Just like Duncan's wearing one now, and Eric Von Donick, and they have these. I mean, they look like gold airplanes. Mainstream archaeologists have to explain this, and they're saying, oh, well, they're flying fish, or, they're bees, or they're birds or something. But birds don't have tails like this. And, there's literally about 40 of these things on display. But you know what? I mean, they depict flying fish, too. I mean, here's a flying fish as a gold pendant. So they can do that, but they got these gold airplanes. And the whole idea that they had flight, if you read the Ramayana, and Eric's going to talk a lot about this tomorrow, this is at the Bangkok airport. This is Rama on his flying chariot of the gods, going some places. And to have flight, you need metals, you need machines, you need electricity. And they had electricity in ancient times, we know that. They had machines, like the Antikythera device, which was found in 1900 in a shipwreck off the Greek island of Antikythera. And in fact, it wasn't until the 1950s that American archaeologists started examining the Antikythera device, which is in the Athens Museum today. And they said, yeah, this is more complicated than any Swiss clock. They had never imagined that the Greeks had anything like this, these complicated machines and cog devices and stuff. And things like this too, which is at Dendera. This is totally authentic. You have these cables coming out of this thing. They're attached to this some kind of device. It looks like some kind of light bulb. You have the serpent here as like a filament. These are Jed columns associated with Osiris. You have some baboon Thoth god here with a knife. You have these mini guys here doing stuff. I mean, this whole scene is pretty bizarre, and it seems to depict an electrical device. And this is completely real. So mainstream archaeologists have to explain this too. There has to be an explanation, and it can't be that it's an electrical device, because ancient time, well, they didn't have electricity, so it has to be something else. Here's their explanation. This is a lotus flower here, and this is the aroma of the flower. That's the explanation. Also, now at the Abydos temple, which is nearby, up on this high lintel, which is about 40 feet off the ground, is these things carved into it, and this is totally real too. Something that looks like a helicopter, other things here that look like submarines. There's something here that looks like a jet. This also looks like some kind of jet here. This is completely real. And now the mainstream has to explain this too. And their explanation, which is not a bad one actually, is that what makes some of these things is that two hieroglyphs are superimposed on each other. And there was a hieroglyph there, and then after 1,000 years, the priest came and they chiseled another hieroglyph on it, and they plastered it up, but then that plaster fell down. So it's two hieroglyphs together. And that does explain a couple of them, but I've been told by Egyptologists that this one here, that looks like this little jet plane, that they don't have an explanation for that one. That's not any hieroglyph they know or see. It's unique. So yeah, the whole idea of flight that people had, I mean, and just like today, we have spaceships, we have airplanes, but we still have ships. Most cargo is still trafficked by ship across oceans. And we have this thing from Panama. This is also what it's called a zoomorphic glyph. It's about a 4-inch long gold pendant. But it seems to be, it's like a monster, but it seems to be a backhoe. It's like heavy equipment. And it has a stone on it. He's got a breastplate in the front of him. But it's this whole part back here. So it's called a zoomorphic glyph in the sense that it's like heavy machinery, some kind of backhoe or something, but it's been turned into essentially a monster, which then became a piece of jewelry. They found things in tombs. This is actually a thing from the Dasani Monastery, ancient Chinese records. They have stories of flight. The Kebra Nagast, which is from Ethiopia, also has stories of King Solomon and his son flying between Israel and Ethiopia and things like that. And of course, the whole thing of these flying discs. Discs that are made to fly through the air, and then here you have these guys on it. And I can see that, yep, my time is up, so I'm going to end it right there. And thanks, everybody.